Hello, everyone. It's my Halloween special. Thank you for joining, coming in, and saying hello to me. This is cool. This is cool. Thank you. I want to give a shout out to, and just a second here, I got to find him again. Oh, come on. Where am I at here? Where are you not going back up? Let me see if I can find him here. He's over on, he's a brand new person. Just came in over on YouTube. Scott Sherman. There you are, Scott Sherman. Welcome to the program. This is not my usual thing, just so you know. But it is my Halloween special, so of course I have to show up in somewhat costume, or at least do something. Oh my goodness. Anyway, thank you for coming. So tonight I take a digression from my typical commentary to discuss Halloween and do some spooky stuff for Halloween. So tonight is a little different than normal. But that, that's nothing unusual, honestly. I've got some photos tonight. I've got some spooky stories, and I've got some discussion on where Halloween actually came from. It's kind of funny. I kind of knew. I mean, everybody sort of knows that Halloween comes from, pagan rituals or whatever. It's some talk of the Druids and things like that. But I didn't really fully understand until I started researching a little bit where Halloween really and truly came from. And let me go ahead and get my blade here, my axe. I got to get the cover on it so I don't accidentally cut myself with it lying back here, or even worse, somebody else. By the way, I've got to give a shout out to my daughter. She's the one that did all of my wonderful makeup here, and my wife for getting the horns for me, so for tonight. So so dress as Nancy, that is scary. Yes, 3 Chevy, that would be a little scary. I agree. Absolutely. And I could be considered, according to Midwest Gunnar, I could be considered the Cum Shaman, but no, I am not dressed as him. I don't even know, is he in jail? I don't know. Did he get picked up for January 6th? I can't remember. Anyway, all right. So let's go ahead and start off. And Halloween is on Monday, and for kids, it's a big holiday. It's a big thing for all of the kids and even some adults. I mean, I know some adults that get really into that holiday. In fact, there was a man, he was a family man. When I was growing up, there's one house in our entire subdivision, and he would just go all out every single year. I've told this story on the last couple of episodes, and I'm going to say it again. I'm going to cover it again. But anyway, he did all kinds of stuff. I mean, he had like the whole spooky music. He had the fog machine. He had the flashing lights, the strobe lights. He had, graveyard things in his grass. He had all these different things. One year, now he would do something every single year to scare the kids. And one year he came up and he came up with this idea that he was going to be a vampire. And so he built a full-size pine box coffin, and he dressed himself up in what you would traditionally think of as Dracula, or what the movie images of Dracula actually are. And he laid in the coffin, and what he would do is when you'd come up to the door was on some sort of an automatic opening, closing kind of thing. And he laid in the coffin. He would activate the door, when you came and knocked on the door or rang the doorbell for the candy. And he would activate the door would open, and then he would slowly activate the coffin, probably the same way. And the coffin would creak open, and he'd be laying there with his hands on his chest, holding this bowl of candy. And so, and he had it set back, I don't know, probably, maybe 10 feet back from the door or something like that. So you actually had to go into the house. And he had hung curtains and things like that to block off the rest of the house. So it was just the coffin was all that you saw. And you would walk in, and on the coffin lid, after it had opened, there was a little sign that said, "Take one only." And so you'd reach in and you'd get a hold of your, candy bar or whatever, because back then we didn't have like all of the mini stuff. So it was full candy bars. And you'd reach in and you'd go to grab the candy bar. And depending upon how many kids were in the group, you could have maybe one or, more, but he would wait until, I don't know, 2, 3, 4 kids in who would reach in for the candy bar, and he would pop up and like jump, and eyes would open, and he'd scream and scare the bejesus out of all of these kids. And it wasn't just that year. It was many, many years. He changed it up every single year. He would change it up. One year he dressed up a mannequin sitting in a rocking chair on the front porch, and he sat behind in very dark clothing so you couldn't see it. Couldn't see him, and he'd rock the chair and then talk to you in like an old woman voice, and then pop out and scare the crap out of you and everything else. I mean, he just really got into it. I don't know if he got into it because he was just, having fun with everybody, or if he was just mean. I don't know. Anyway, the thing is it was always the one house on the street that you always waited until it got really, really dark before you went to go see. And, yeah, I mean, he, like I said, he did all kinds of things, but those were the two that I remember was the Dracula one. And then of course the old lady sitting in the rocking chair. And there's a lot of places I've seen, even with my kids, when we've gone trick-or-treating, there's a lot of places that I've seen that things, some people go all out for the holiday and some don't. It just kind of depends on what's going on. Now, I do remember one house that we went to, they didn't believe in giving out candy. And so what they did, and this was way before all of the fears of your neighbors and bad people, doing bad things to kids and everything else. But she would the wife would make cider and put them in the little Dixie cups, the small Dixie cups for all the kids. And so you'd come in, and she would bring all the kids into the front entryway and hand out, glasses of hot apple cider. And then one year, I think they gave out, silver dollars, or silver half dollars. I can't remember. So, growing up was a lot of fun with stuff like that. And, unfortunately, after a while, and I can remember as I started getting older, and of course, you got to understand this is growing up in, the 80s, the late 70s, early 80s, and we started to have those scares where people put razor blades in apples, and they had, scares where people put medicines or medical products and stuff inside candy bars. They were injecting candy bars with all kinds of poison. You had all those stories that would come out. And unfortunately, some of that stuff, it turned over into where you could only go and do safe Halloween. And then, of course, nowadays, when you go to a school, you can't even wear a mask anymore. I mean, we used to dress up in schools and they would have all kinds of stuff. But, I kind of digress. I really think my generation's probably the last generation who will really have the memories of the wonder of all of the things that we used to do as kids, prior to all of the quote scary things that happen in the world today, in terms of things that go on with especially children and children being, abducted and all kinds of stuff. I really feel bad for some of the kids today that can't really participate in some of the things that we did as kids. Now, first things first, though, I do have to say tonight I am drinking out of the new bottle of Four Roses. If you recall, on Wednesday, I said I had an empty bottle or an almost empty bottle. This is the brand new bottle because when I filled up my glass, it only filled up 3/4 of the way from the last bottle. So I had to open up the new bottle, which is essentially what I have. So this is the Four Roses bourbon. I'm starting to become monotonous with this because I really like this. It's got like a bite at the end. A spicy bite at the end that I really appreciate and really, really like. Okay, so let's start off with, and let me go ahead and get my socials running. So let's go ahead and start off, how did Halloween start? I mean, everybody kind of knows Halloween is like, you get dressed up, and it harkens back, the general consensus is that it harkens back to an older time where, people felt that ghosts and goblins and ghouls and ancient spirits would come and roam the earth. And by the way, in the description, I have got a series of locations, sites, that if you want to scare your kids or tell them, scary stories and stuff like that during your Halloween festivities on Monday, go ahead and grab some of those. There are some real good ones. I am not going to be able to get to all of them tonight. And so you should go and take a look, grab all of, all or none or whatever, but grab them all. They're in the description of the video. If you're on the audio portion of the broadcast, you can, of course, head on over to my Rumble channel or my YouTube channel, because at least for now, as long as YouTube stays up, and you can check out the links and go and grab them out of the descriptions on the videos. So that is, I've compiled a bunch of them. Some of the stories are like overlapping, but most of them are pretty different, and you can give it a try. Some of them come from history. Some of them are, other stories that pop up. But anyway, so as far as where Halloween comes from, Halloween, pretty much all historians point back to the festival of Samhain. And I say that is the correct pronunciation for what is spelled Samhain. And it is a Gaelic word. And again, I'm going to pronounce it. It's Samhain. Okay. Which in some cases, some historians believe that Samhain actually kind of morphed into Halloween. It was sort of a mashup of a couple different holiday names that happened during that time. But Samhain was essentially happened on November 1st. It was the Celts who celebrated this. And the Celts, for those that don't know, they were in Ireland, England, some of the northern parts of Europe as well. And they were a group, an organization, loosely based organization of people that believed on the end of summer, which literally what Samhain means is summer's end, but the end of summer and the turn into winter. And so what they would do, the dark days of winter. And so what they would do is they would spend 3 days having a celebration. And that celebration included things like gathering up cattle for slaughter, gathering up some things to put away for the winter, to prepare for the winter. It was also the time where they felt that the spirit world and the human world got so close together that the barrier that would normally hold them apart broke down, and that the spirits of ancestors long gone, as well as fairies and other ghosts and goblins and demons, could come across into the human world. And they had the possibility, or that you would have the possibility, where if a ghost or a goblin or even an ancestor came across, that they would grab you and take you away. And so in order to disguise yourself, they would create costumes, which is where the costume idea comes from. They would create, they would change their appearance so that they couldn't get picked up by an ancestor's spirit and taken off into the spirit world. The other thing that they would do, like I said, I mentioned they would slaughter cattle and for the celebration and for storage and stuff. And so the other thing that they would do is they would take these bones and they would put them into a pile and then light that pile on fire. And ironically, that would be called a bonfire, which has since morphed into our term of bonfire. So this is where bonfires came from. And as a part of the celebration too, the Druids, which were their clerics, okay, their spiritual people, would take the time to try and look into the future, kind of idea. And the Celts believed that the Druids could actually see better and see farther into the future during the Samhain festival. It would generally last about 3 days. And one other thing that was kind of interesting about it is that during the Samhain festival, there were different parts and pieces, like I was saying, the bonfires or the bonfires. And then they also would bring in their military commanders. And these military commanders would actually be put up on thrones. And the funny thing was that it was also a time of peace, because if you were caught using any kind of weapon during the festival, you potentially could get put to death, because you weren't supposed to use, armaments during this time. It was a very, very special time to them. And so they kind of made it a really big deal. Well, of course, as time went on, the festival of Samhain got captured by the Christians and the Catholics of the era, and they started to do things like, let's see, I gotta find. Oh, so in terms of Christianity at the same time had the All Saints Day, which was at first on May 13th, but then was moved by one of the popes. I think, I'm trying to think of who this person is, but anyway, they moved it from the May 13th over to November 1st because of the fact that they were trying to collapse it into that time frame and of course work with the idea of Samhain and try and convert the Celts and some of those people over into Christianity. So what they felt was if they could put a Christian holiday close enough, then they would be able to modify or change the thinking of the Celts in terms of their idea about Samhain. So the Christians brought their All Saints Day to November 1st. And that, of course, spawned All Hallows Eve, which is the eve before All Saints Day. So that's Halloween 31st. The thing about it is that not all of this is completely clear. They have pieces and parts from history, mostly from people in Ireland who have been keeping track of some of these things, but not everything is completely clear in terms of all of this, in terms of what is and what is not part of the Halloween tradition. And again, it kind of gets a little blurred, sort of like the living and the dead on that night. So some of this stuff may not be exactly correct, but it's pretty darn close. Now, just as a little side fact, it is reported that roughly 1/4 of all of the candy sold annually in the US is actually purchased for Halloween. In fact, there was a joke running around at one point that Halloween was created by dentists to make sure that they kept, kept business coming in, especially during the Halloween season, because all of the sugary treats and everything that goes on. But there isn't anything to that as far as I know. Now, we also have traditions that are in the same vein. So for an example, we go and we carve pumpkins. And that actually isn't where that started either, ironically enough. It started over in England with the carving of turnips. And again, focused on the fact that you were trying to ward off evil spirits. They would carve the turnips into scary faces and things like that and place them outside their homes to ward off the evil spirits of their ancestors coming to potentially grab them and take them back to the netherworld. So realistically, because we didn't have a lot of turnips over here in America, that's where the pumpkin carving kind of took off. So here in America, rather than using turnips, we use pumpkins. And we would carve them into these scary things. Now, putting the candle in the inside came a lot later, obviously. But Halloween really didn't start and really catch on in America because of the fact that in, say, the colonial New England areas, a lot of the Protestants and Puritans landed up there. And so in America, it was actually celebrated in the colonial days. It was actually celebrated more in the South, and not so much in the North because of the difference in the religious backgrounds between the two groups, between the North side and the South side. So, their festivities in the colonial days was more geared toward things like telling ghost stories around a fire, mischief making. So the whole concept or the whole idea of doing trick or treat really came from here in the U.S. So that's, that we can claim here. As far as that goes, we can claim the tradition of saying trick or treat. The idea with the apples, though, there was something, and I can't recall right off the top of my head. Let me see if I can find it here. But they had a lot of, in the old days, they had a lot of things with regards to apples. And so the concept of apple or bobbing for apples actually spun out of this concept, as far as like they would use apples, they would cut slices and eat them in order to, again, prevent or have something to deal with the dead, preventing them from getting picked up by the dead. I think it had something to do with like covering your smell or something along those lines with the apples. But that, of course, morphed into the whole bobbing for apples kind of idea. And of course, we all know that apples are usually harvested in the fall. And so that's where a lot of things like the ciders come from. And also too, you can actually make fermented apples turns into kind of a mulled cider and can actually create alcohol. I mean, pretty much fermented anything creates alcohol. But the ciders of old are not the ciders that we have. They would be ciders of, they would be ciders for, obviously alcohol drinking. Now, I do have a question here that I just caught in this. And this comes from Facebook, and a little late to the show, but what are the symbols on your face? Okay. So I obviously am dressed up as a Viking. Okay. And I've got, some Viking war face paint on and that kind of stuff. But the two symbols, and I'll give you a good look. So this one here is actually the runic, the Viking runic symbol for berserk. And for those that, may or may not remember, but berserkers were people who would go crazy in battle. I mean, they would go and they would see complete red in battle. And they would, sometimes they wouldn't even be able to stop. Okay. This other symbol, which I can't see it. I can't look into my camera kind of thing, but this other symbol over here is actually a symbol for protection from, Odin, Thor, and I think it's pronounced Tyr, 3 Norse, gods. Obviously Thor, the god of thunder, Odin, the benefactor and maker of everything, and then somebody named Tyr. I don't know who that is, but that's what this symbol would represent. And so the Vikings actually, in terms of their, just to kind of take us off a little bit off topic, off of Halloween, but the Vikings, in fact, would go and they had different makeup and face paint for different things. But oftentimes when they would go into battle, they would paint runic symbols for protection. They also felt that the face paint would protect them from evil and from harm as they went into battle. So that's why you would see, typically, like a lot of native tribes would do. The Native Americans believed that their face paint and war paint would help protect them in battle and things like that. So yeah, that's basically where that comes from. So those 2 symbols. And again, just to say again, I did not face paint myself. My daughter, who is much more adept at makeup than I am, she went ahead and helped me out before the program and got me all painted up. So, but anyway, so that's kind of where that comes from. All right. So, we actually started moving more toward, in the early 1900s. We started to, in the late 1800s to starting in the 1900s, there was a move in America that basically allowed or molded Halloween by itself rather than like a festival or something about the dead. It actually turned into more of a community and neighborly get-togethers. And again, with ghosts, witchcraft, pranks, things like that. And at the turn of the century, Halloween parties for both children and adults became a very common way for us to celebrate the day in this particular case. Parties were created. There was games, food, festivals, festive costumes, things like that. Parents were encouraged to take anything frightening or grotesque out of the Halloween celebrations. And so, obviously, as things progress and change throughout time, this is where things started to change as far as like the whole grotesque stuff. Now, believe it or not, I mean, you got to remember the whole thought process and scariness from Halloween was trying to ward off evil spirits. So there was some pretty drastic stuff that was done, like heads on spikes or pikes, things of that nature. So there was a grotesque element to the Halloween celebration and stuff. But we kind of moved on from that. And of course, trick-or-treating evolved and everything. And we started to, there's little sects of people that do things like Devil's Night, which is the night before Halloween, which is focused on just mayhem and arson in particular. And then, of course, you have, our American thing of going around and getting candy. Now, they didn't do that over in England up until later. They actually didn't start doing that until in recent history. So, one of the things that my daughter and I love to do, which I don't know if anybody else does this, but one of the things that my daughter and I love to do is we love to watch a scary movie. Now, I don't think it's going to happen this year, only because it's a Monday and she's got her own little parties and things like that. But there are times where we like to get together and watch a scary movie. And some of the more scarier movies have traditionally come out during Halloween. And also the other thing is that some of those scary movies are actually attempted to be based on actual stories or events that are part of our history. So, for an example, there are 6 horror movies that are supposedly based off of actual events. The first one came out in 1922. It's a black and white movie, obviously. It's Nosferatu, Nosferatu. And it was actually the German film, and it was fully titled Nosferatu, A Symphony of Horror. And it's a knockoff of Bram Stoker's 1897 novel of Dracula, which Dracula actually didn't exist. The whole concept of Dracula itself was based off of a Eastern European character or person called Vlad the Impaler. And so Dracula himself didn't exist. And the whole concept of Dracula living in Transylvania actually comes from a mansion that is in Transylvania that is tied to Vlad the Impaler. So that whole thing all comes from Bram Stoker's Dracula book that came out in 1897, not 1987, 1897. So that's actually really, really pretty good in terms of that. Another movie that a lot of people look at and watch is, of course, a big favorite, is The Exorcist. Now, The Exorcist came out in 1973. And it was actually based off of a 1949 story that appeared in the Washington Post. Now, the Washington Post did 2 individual stories on this about a 14-year-old boy's exorcism that happened in Maryland. Okay. In one of the stories, the newspaper reported that the boy broke into and I'm quoting here, the boy broke into a violent tantrum of screaming, cursing, and voicing of Latin phrases, a language that he had never studied. The story, apparently the whole story of 1949, inspired author William Peter Blatty, his 1971 novel, The Exorcist, which of course was the basis for the 1973 film. Now, the reality of the fact is that article that ran in the Washington Post was likely just based off of a boy that was what do they call it? Probably troubled but not possessed. And in 1999, there was a man who was in Maryland. He was a Marylander named Mark Opsasnick, Opsasnick. He didn't buy the story. He didn't buy the original story of the boy being possessed. So he started to investigate it, and he actually published his findings in Strange magazine in 1999. And he identified the original boy in the story and interviewed people who might know the boy, might have known the boy. And concluded that the boy likely had psychological problems and was, mimicking the priest's Latin as The Exorcist was named. Now, we know from Hannah's hideous and horrific history that some of these people actually had problems with things like mercury and lead poisoning. And what was the other? There's another metal that can affect the brain quite well that was in common use back in those days. So there is a good possibility that this boy just unfortunately was very sick, and basically ended up where they just ended up having problems with their brains, and that's why they sounded off. Now, another one that's very popular is the Amityville Horror, which came out in 1979. Now, this is actually partially true and partially false. The partially true part is or partially, let me say this, let me rephrase this, not false, but fabricated. Part of it was fabricated. Part of it is true. And the way that worked is the Amityville Horror was based off of a story, the true story, that on November 13th, 1974, a 23-year-old Ronald, known as Butch, DeFeo Jr., murdered his entire family in their sleep. And apparently after the murder happened, they got it all cleaned up, et cetera, et cetera. They ended up, the property was purchased a year later by the Lutz family. Now, the Lutz family, and this actually happened in Amityville, New York. It's out on Long Island, I believe. Now, the parents of the family, George and Kathy Lutz, claimed that they experienced all kinds of paranormal phenomena in the house, like green slime oozing from the walls, creature with red eyes, multiple family members levitating in their beds. And the claims appeared in Jay Anson's book, 1977 book, The Amityville Horror, which of course inspired the 1979 movie. Okay, which also spawned a bunch of other movies as well. Now, the lawyer for Butch DeFeo later admitted that he, George, and Kathy had created this horror story over many bottles of wine. However, and there's also actually a couple that Ed and Lorraine Warren that got involved with the Amityville story and started promoting it. They actually also promoted a whole bunch of other stuff as well. But the actual story, the actual story of the killing is true, but the paranormal activity afterward, that's still questionable. The lawyer says that they created it, but the Lutzes still believed it up until recently. I think, I'm not sure if the Lutzes are still alive or not, but Coco Dominki over here on Rumble says that DeFeo just died in March of 2021. So he claimed they made it up. The Lutzes claim that they actually experienced it, and I don't know. It could be true, but I do know the murders did take place in the house, and that's what kind of spawned it. Okay. Another good one that's out there is, let me see. Oh, okay. So let me actually, I'm going to jump a little bit. So let me tie, if you remember, I just mentioned, who is this? Ed and Lorraine Warren. Okay. Now, Ed and Lorraine Warren actually made a living out of promoting ghost stories and promoting stuff, because what they did is they actually set themselves up as clairvoyants and psychics who investigated ghosts and haunting. And they would go and introduce themselves into the story. And here's another story that they stuck themselves in, which was the haunting in Connecticut, which was in 2009. So they decided that after, or about a decade after Amityville, they became involved with this Snedeker family, Snedeker. The parents of parents Alan and Carmen, I'm not even going to bother trying to pronounce their last name again, claimed that they'd experienced paranormal phenomenon at a Connecticut house that they had rented in 1986. They both claimed that some demons had, quote, raped them. So the Warrens went there, and they would, they basically said, hey, we'll help publicizing the stories. And they hired a horror novelist named Ray Garton to write a book about the haunting. But Garton soon realized that a lot of the information wasn't making sense, according to a, let me see, where's Radford? What is Radford? Radford's. Oh, this is coming from the article. Okay. So Garton objected to his publisher's decision to sell the book, 1992 book, In a Dark Place, the story of a true haunting, as nonfiction, and admitted the story itself wasn't true. Now, the 2009, in 2009, the movie The Haunting in Connecticut came out, which covered the story, covered the book and the story. And it was also based on a true story. Now, the funny thing about the whole based on a true story stuff is that you have to be careful with stuff like that, because if you remember the Blair Witch Project actually came out and it was supposedly based on a true story as well. So, which it wasn't, we found out later, but it was supposed to be based on true events and true story. Now, the funny thing is the story of Ed and Lorraine Warren. They promoted so many hauntings during their decade-long career that they actually became characters themselves in The Conjuring. So The Conjuring is actually about, and The Conjuring 2, The Nun, and Annabelle Comes Home. And apparently The Conjuring 3, which I'm not sure if it's out yet or not, it's slated to come out in 2020. But they are characters. They are the two characters. Ed and Lorraine Warren are the two characters who set themselves up as paranormal experts and investigators. So that was kind of interesting to tie that back into that. All right. So what I have now is I have some photos that I want to show you. And these photos are all real, and they have real stories behind them. So this first story, or this first photo that I'm going to tell you about, is actually a 1928 image of Lon Chaney, Chaney, and it was from a silent film called Laugh, Clown, Laugh in 1928. Check this out. Now, honestly, I'm going to blow it up a little bit here for you so you guys can see it. But honestly, I'm going to tell you, this thing, if that isn't the inspiration for it, I really don't know. Like Pennywise, if that isn't the inspiration for that character, I have no idea where they got that character from, because that is just amazing. How uncanny Pennywise's costume was in the movie, and how that lines up with this 1928 image as a super creepy clown. And to be honest with you, if I saw clown images like this, I definitely would be afraid of clowns. I would just be afraid of them. All right. So I'm going to take that away for a second. Let me get on to the next photo. This one is, this one's going to be really, really spooky. Okay. So this photo is a actual photo taken by the BTK killer of himself. His name was Dennis Radner, and he appeared to be a loyal husband and a proud father of two. He was also a Boy Scout troop leader and a church council president. But he murdered 10 people in and around Wichita, Kansas from 1974 to 1991. He called himself the BTK killer for his modus operandi of blind, torture, and kill. And he was finally captured in 2005. And authorities discovered his secret stash of bondage photos like this one. So this is the actual BTK killer using some of the things that he did to the people to whom he killed. Now, if that isn't spooky and scary, I don't know what to tell you. That's just, wow. And the fact that the authorities actually found this photo is, beyond me. All right, moving on to the next photo. Oh, I don't want that one. I want this one first. And then I'll go back. All right. So I don't know if anybody remembers. Well, they probably don't remember this far back, but between 1947 and 1949, there was a divorcee by the name of Martha Beck and her boyfriend, Raymond Fernandez. They were dubbed the Lonely Hearts Killers. Lonely Hearts Killers. And they were apprehended, ironically, for the murder of Delphine Downing and her 2-year-old daughter, Renelle. And the investigation led police to the Downings' basement in Queens, New York, where they discovered the body of another victim by the name of Janet Fay. Well, this photo, and this is a little creepy, but this photo is... My face is all creepy, shrunken down. You're right, it is. But this photo came from the actual investigation when they found Janet Fay's body and they were unearthing it from the basement. The next photo, just to continue on with this, that this in 1949, the woman in this picture is the convicted Lonely Hearts Killer Martha Beck, and she's meeting with her attorney in an anteroom of the Bronx Supreme Court in New York. This was the same day that Beck actually admitted to abandoning her 2 children to the Salvation Army a year prior so she could be with Fernandez. And Beck and Fernandez were each convicted of capital murder and were put to death via electric chair in 1951. This is some creepy, creepy stories. All right. Okay, this next image is taken on August 30th of 2015. It is the last known photo of the victim, Jolene Callan, and her boyfriend, her ex-boyfriend, Lauren Bunner. They went on a hike through the Alabama's Cheshire, Cheasha. I believe that's Cheshire State. Or, I'm sorry, it's not an S. Cheaha. So Cheha. I don't know. Somebody from Alabama, if you're out there, let me know. State Park. And she was 18 years old at the time. She was weeks away from leaving town for college when she agreed to join her ex, Lauren Bunner, on a hike. She is completely unaware that he brought a gun. And in this photo, she is taking the picture of the view on this essentially 40-foot cliff. Shortly after this, Callan was shot in her head, and her boyfriend Bunner dumped her body off the 40-foot cliff that she is actually standing in front of. It's the last known photo of Callan, taken by Bunner moments before he killed her. That's a little creepy. That's a little scary. No, it is for me. All right, next one. Oh, so this one kind of falls into the paranormal, I guess. And I mean, not so much as far as the actual origins of the photo, but more the fact that it's kind of more in the paranormal. But if you look on this photo, which could actually qualify for the pet of the week, by the way. But if you look at this photo, this is a photo, a real photo, taken of what is reportedly called the Florida skunk ape. Now, this is also supposed to be the cousin or a same, within the same lines as up here in the Northwest, what we call Bigfoot. And whether or not Bigfoot is real, by the way, has not been either disproven or proven yet. But a lesser known variation of the mythical primate, the skunk ape, was first reportedly cited in 1942, and the most convincing proof of its existence is this particular photograph, this one right here, that was anonymously sent to the Sarasota County Sheriff's Department on December 29th of 2000. The woman who mailed the ominous photo here claimed that the ape-like creature had made whooping noises for 3 straight nights and had an awful smell, then fled, never to be seen again. Now this is pretty spooky. I mean, I don't know. I'm hoping that she's using a telephoto lens here because, oh my gosh, that thing looks huge and is kind of scary looking to me for sure. Very well, it could be just somebody who rubbed skunk weed all over him and put on a gorilla suit too. But, yeah, that's kind of weird, kind of scary. All right. Another photo. This one would totally freak me out. Totally freak me out. So the owner of this photo apparently, claims that they were watching Netflix and they fell asleep. Woke up a little bit later and they found this image. I don't know if you can see the wording down below on the bottom here. I'm going to try and get it a little bit closer for you guys to see. But, oh my gosh. I don't even know how I would respond to that. To be honest with you, I have no idea how I would respond to that. To wake up seeing my television with the words, "I'll settle for you." Ooh, boy. Wow. That would be scary to wake up to, for sure. Oh, wow. Now, the first thing that I thought of when I saw this was Poltergeist. You know, the whole Poltergeist, where the little girl's sitting in front of the TV and you see it's basically snow that she gets sucked into the TV as a part of the Poltergeist movie, which, by the way, Poltergeist was also supposed to be based off of a true, story of true events. But anyway, after this, I don't think I would fall asleep in front of the TV at all. After that, there's just no way. I'm sorry. That would freak me out. I don't really get scared that easily, but that would definitely freak me out. Okay. So this one actually has, this next one, I'm going to tell you right now, it actually has a fully logical explanation to it, but I got to show it to you first. It is really, really creepy. Take a look at this. And let me get this a little bigger. This, while it looks like somebody with an incredibly long head, and scary, like alien type, skull, this actually is, and I see some people responding to the last one, like, this one here, Redford, turn my TV off every night. Nope. Yeah, I would agree that's just scary. But this right here, this photo actually is a totally explainable photo. It is a CT scan image of somebody who was claustrophobic and they moved during the scan. And that's where this image comes from, reportedly. So you can kind of see how, the skull is down in the bottom section, over on this side, and then the movement of the head as the person got spooked, couldn't sit in it very long, or couldn't sit in the tube. I don't know if everybody's had a CT scan, but they tell you when you go in there, you gotta stay completely still so that the image, and the contrast dye can be picked up. And so this is basically what happened here is with that. You can see the whole stretching of the head as the person sat up, but it is kind of freaky, to think it. Yeah. And it looks like somebody's skull cap fell off. Coco Dominky says, that's true. That is entirely true. All right, let me see if I got another image here. No. So those are all the images. Okay. So, some spooky images and spooky real life stories. Maybe Hannah will be able to on the Mark K show will be able to bring back her horrific history. It's too bad they're on the radio. I mean, that would be kind of cool to see the photos and stuff from that. All right. So, I have another story, ghost story. And this one actually spawned, because again, all these horror stories, you know, even if, and ghost stories and stuff, even if they aren't true, they tend to spawn, movies or books. And in this particular case, this one actually hits home for me because the movie was filmed in a ski resort that I actually used to go to as a kid to go ski, Timberline Lodge. But the actual hotel and the basis for the book lives in Estes Park, Colorado. And this is the Stanley Hotel. So let me go ahead and bring this up. So this is the Stanley Hotel. This is the image that you could see. And it's luxurious with Georgian architecture, grand staircase in the lobby, world-renowned whiskey bar, which is another reason why I would like it. But it's a haunted hotel that was inspiration for the Stephen King novel, The Shining. And he actually wrote the novel while staying in room 217, which is reportedly the most haunted room in the entire hotel. It's supposed to be the one with the most ghost activity. And the woman, her name is Elizabeth Wilson, or they assume that, and she walked into that room holding a lit candle, not knowing that the room itself was experiencing a gas leak. She survived the explosion, but ever since she died years later, she kept saying, very kindly folds clothes while the guests are out. And she also separates unmarried couples who are sharing the bed. With a cold force pushing against them, apparently. So after she died, she went back to that room, apparently, or at least her spirit did. And she, you know, folds clothes and separates the unmarried couples and so on and so forth. The hotel staff apparently says that the founder and his wife, who died in the 40s, are still roaming the hallways also, and hanging out in the billiards room, playing the piano in the middle of the night. Guests apparently have witnessed things like a friendly cowboy who appears at the corner of the bed, hearing children giggle and run around the hallways. Luggage gets unpacked, lights being turned on and off. And apparently you can still book room 217 or any room in the hotel if you dare. So this was the inspiration for The Shining. And of course, as I just read those things, you know that certain things showed up in the book for The Shining for that. But The Shining itself was filmed in on Mount Hood in Oregon in the Timberline Lodge, which was always fun to go and hang out at. Now, another place that is very, very haunted, apparently, in this little story, is in Birmingham, Alabama, known as the Sloss Furnaces. Now, Birmingham was founded shortly after the Civil War in 1871, and in order to fix our crumbling infrastructure after the war, a guy by the name of Colonel James Withers Sloss hired people to work on a blast furnace. And this furnace, of course, transformed coal and ore into hard steel. The job, of course, back then was incredibly dangerous. Not saying that it isn't now, but you know, a lot of safety measures have been put in place since then. But many workers kept falling to their deaths and became incinerated in the furnaces. Then a person by the name of James Slag Wormwood came along, and he was the foreman in charge of all the workers during what was called the graveyard shift. between sunset and sunrise. And slag apparently took risks to improve the production of the plant. And that evidently led to more than 50 deaths from people who had, lack of sleep, no breaks, couldn't see anything because it was at night, dark, and heat exhaustion also because they were working in a hot place in sometimes 120-degree weather. There were a number of accidents, including an explosion that left 6 workers who were burned completely blind. History states that slag supposedly lost his footing and fell into a pool of melted iron ore, his body melting within seconds. Well, obviously made up mostly of water, probably just evaporated really fast. However, many people think that because he had never wanted to set foot on the top of the furnace, that it was the workers of the graveyard shift that actually tossed him into the furnace. That's kind of a scary story. And supposedly that place is still there. I don't know. I don't believe it's active, but that place is still there in Alabama. Okay, let me see if I can find. Oh, this one's another movie that popped up. So this one here is the real life House of Seven Gables in Salem, Massachusetts. Obviously, Salem, Massachusetts is legendary for its history of witches and the witch trials, Salem witch trials in particular. But the Turner Ingersoll Mansion is known as the House of the Seven Gables. And it has a number of ghostly reports from it because the house is now a museum, and it's become quite popular around Halloween, and the visitors have seen some spooky, unsettling things. For example, a man climbing up and down the secret staircase, a little boy who giggles and runs around the attic. And even Susanna Ingersoll, the cousin of Nathaniel Hawthorne and the author of the novel, The House of the Seven Gables, is also been seen. And one visitor apparently heard a woman's voice in his ear whispering. And when he turned around expecting to see his girlfriend, no one was there. It's the House of the Seven Gables. So we have a lot of history with hauntings and things like that. Most of them are questionable and benign. But a lot of these sites, believe it or not, throughout the entire United States or even the world, a lot of them are actually tied to really horrific things. For an example, here in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and I know I've got a couple Pennsylvania people out here who can clarify or, verify the existence of this place. But apparently Eastern State Penitentiary in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania is also quite haunted because apparently the prison took solitary confinement to a whole new level. They forced all of the prisoners to do everything in solitary. They ate alone. They, exercised alone. They pretty much lived completely alone. Guards would cover their heads when they left their cells so they couldn't be seen or see others. And they would walk around. There were about 300 prisoners in that solitary receiving that harsh punishment. And apparently they were dunked in ice baths, hung on a wall in the middle of winter until the ice formed on their skin. They had a mad chair that would cut off circulation. Then you had the iron gag, you had the hole, which was apparently all to help criminals find penance, remorse, and salvation. In reality, drove many of them insane. Now, supposedly, there are ghosts, a number of them haunting the grounds. For an example, Chicago gangster Al Capone served 8 months in this facility. Warden Herbert Hard-Boiled Smith, 2 guards that were murdered, and hundreds of inmates that were either murdered or had died from disease and old age in the place. And accordingly, cell block 12 has voices and cackling. Cell block 4 has the silhouette of a guard in the tower, footsteps, wailing, and whispers. So apparently a locksmith, the story goes, had entered cell block 4 sometime in the 90s and felt someone gripping him so tight that he couldn't move. And apparently some paranormal investigators and researchers have visited and left that place with the belief that it is a hub of otherworldly activity. Often referred to as the Prison of Horrors, this is also considered one of the most haunted places in America. Night and day tours are offered if one wants to see the crumbling dark cells and the long, narrow hallway leading to death row. This is a very, very spooky place. If you want to go on Halloween or something, go and do that. Sure. Go ahead. Have some fun. All right. Let me see. I've got a few minutes left. Let me move on to something. So here's a few short stories. This one actually caught my eye when I was looking through it. This is in Boston, in the Boston area. And apparently, if you're in Bucksport, Maine, you'll come along this object. It's, and I'll try and blow this up for everyone. Let me see if I can do that so people can get a really good look here. Blow this up here. So apparently, you can see right here this obelisk, and this obelisk it was erected as a memorial to the founder of the town. And apparently the founder of the town, who was very into witches and witchcraft, accused a woman of witchcraft. Now that you've seen it, I'll go ahead and back off and so I can see the story again. The town's founder, who died in 1795, was obsessed with witches and accused a woman in town of practicing witchcraft. He sentenced her to hang, ignoring her pleas for mercy. And he made a spectacle of her and had her executed in the town square. But right before she was killed, the woman laughed and said that she would make him regret his words. Now, here's the words that she put out there. She said, she is reportedly saying, "Jonathan Buck, listen to these words, the last my tongue will utter. It is the spirit of the only true and living God which bids me speak them to you. You will soon die. Over your grave they will erect a stone that all may know where your bones are crumbling into dust. But listen, upon that stone the imprint of my feet will appear, and for all time, long after you and your accursed race have perished from the earth, will the people from far and wide know that you murdered a woman. Remember well, Jonathan Buck. Remember well." Now, let me show you that photo again. She made that speech as her last thing to say. And take a look at what you can see hanging right underneath the word Buck. It appears that this stain showed up after a little bit of time, and it apparently looks like a woman's foot and leg. Now, some people believe, according to the article, believe that the story was created or fabricated after this showed up to kind of explain it, give it a little bit of, mystery or whatever. That is entirely possible. But nevertheless, the foot shows underneath that obelisk of the Jonathan Buck, or the Buck grave. All right. A last, we'll call this a last. There's a last little short story. Now, this comes from Reader's Digest, and this one caught my eye, not just because of the length of it, but also caught my eye because it is a actual user. So somebody of reddit.com went ahead and put this story together. And whether it's true or not, I don't know, but it certainly is enough to raise the hair on the back of your head if you've ever been in a situation where you've felt something in terms of the paranormal. I've never lived in a haunted house, but my mother did as a teen, writes the reddit.com user Patented Spacehook, recounting what she calls a true event. Other houses on her street had strange things going on too. A few homes away from her lived a family. One night, the daughter went to bed with a bad headache. The next day, she was dead. She passed away from an aneurysm. After her funeral, the family went away to get their minds off the tragedy, and the father asked my uncle, my mother's brother, to check on their pets. My mom and dad, who were dating at the time, went with him. My mother had heard that there was a grand piano, and she wanted to play it. My dad was studying to be a veterinarian. After entering the house, my uncle and my father headed to the basement to see the animals. My mother went to the piano on the ground floor. She was playing it when she felt something brush her ankles. She thought a cat must have left the basement and walked past her. So she kept playing. Then she felt it again. She looked under the piano and saw nothing. When she started again, she felt hands clasp her legs tightly. She dashed to the basement door, called for the uncle and the father, and waited for them to come up. Back outside, my uncle could tell that my mom was rattled and asked what was wrong. She had told him what happened, and he turned white. He told her that the daughter who died, and listen to this, the daughter who died used to play a game with the father of the household. When he would play the piano, she would crawl underneath, grab his ankles, and push his feet up and down on the pedals. Wow. That would be freaky. That would be totally freaky. Wow. I don't know if I could do that. All right. So I'm going to relay to you the final story of the evening. And this is my own personal experience and realistically, my only experience with what I would consider the paranormal. Now, I did tell this story in one of my earlier episodes, paranormal experiences. But I'm going to bring it back tonight because this is Halloween. As most of my listeners know, I was in the service. As a part of my service, I did a stint or a trip over to Germany. I was stationed in northern Germany for a time, and we got the opportunity to be able to tour some of the areas within northern Germany. One of them was a Kaserne, or a concentration, or not a concentration camp, but one of them was a concentration camp, not a Kaserne, sorry, a concentration camp up in the north that was, I can't remember, it was near Bremerhaven, and I can't remember the name of the camp, but we went to it to tour it. It was one of the tours that was offered, and we just wanted to get out and kind of see some German stuff, but let me kind of set the scene for you. So you roll up in this tour bus and you're sitting in the parking lot, and up in front of you, or what you see in front of you, is this massive wall and fence, and with these wrought iron gates on it. Now the gates were open, and it was in September. So Germany, especially northern Germany, has a very similar climate to what I'm used to here in the Northwest. And although at the time that I went, I had been in the South, in Carolina, Georgia, and then or South Carolina, Georgia, and then ultimately Texas, before I went on this trip. So I had been there for probably about 6 months by the time this rolled around. And so I was somewhat acclimated, I guess you could say, to the southern climate, where it's warmer. But over in Germany, obviously, I was really enjoying the September, what would be considered fall weather, because it was generally cooler than what we had come from. And so, I felt a lot more like home where I had come from, which was the Northwest. So we get off the bus and we're all standing in front and we all go to walk through the gates. And as I was walking in, literally at the gates themselves, like where the gates attached into the stone wall, because remember, they were open. So where they had attached, there was a clear line, at least to my feeling, in terms of the temperature of the ambient air. And I actually had to step back out and step back in and step back out and step back in order to verify that what I was feeling was actually happening. And what it was is when you were inside the wall, the air temperature actually dropped a few degrees. When you stepped outside the wall, the temperature raised a few degrees. And what had happened was this concentration camp had several unmarked graves. And by unmarked, I mean they weren't like your typical grave site where you would see the names of people. They had just simple numbers. 150,000, 100,000, 200,000. Those were estimates of how many bodies were actually in those graves. And they were literally mounds of earth with stone plaques with the numbers on them. And there was another one that actually had a range. They didn't even know how many. There was just a range of what they felt was the body count. They showed us during the tour, they showed us where they had done the showers and turned them into gas chambers, where they had rings mounted into the stone walls of the facility to where they could go and lock the prisoners up to the rings. But what really struck me was the whole concept of walking in and walking out of that essential invisible wall of temperature, where I felt warmer outside of the facility and colder when I went inside. And again, it wasn't a huge change, but it was noticeable. And that is the one and only time that I have ever run across what I would consider a paranormal or ghostly experience. Maybe you have one. Maybe you don't. But either way, Halloween is a fun time to celebrate those things that are unexplainable and our thoughts about the other realm, the beyond. So enjoy it. If you're an adult, seriously, go and get dressed up. This isn't the only costume that I have ever dressed up in. I have been known to dress up. I've been a leprechaun. I've been a pirate. I was actually Caesar twice. Go and have fun with it. Enjoy it, because there are so many times that we as adults, we get so pressured with the stresses of life that we just have to let loose. So getting the opportunity to do things like paint your face, put on a silly hat, do something different, even if it's just once a year for Halloween or something like that, take the opportunity. Be the kid that you can remember being. Because believe me, sooner or later, we're all, we don't survive in this world. We do end up leaving. So have fun while you can. Enjoy it. That, ladies and gentlemen, is my final Whiskey Musings thought of the evening. do me a favor. If you have kids, make absolutely certain that they are safe on Monday. When they go around, check the candy, because evil does exist in this world. And make sure that they have, bright colored clothing, costumes, things like that, lights, just to keep them safe, but let them have fun as well. All right. Coming up, Wednesday is the big day. I'm telling you, Wednesday is the big off the hook day. Okay. I just want to say thank you all for joining, but Wednesday is a big day. I have Mark K from the Mark K Show for the interview of this broadcast's lifetime. I'm going to say probably right now. It's going to be epic. I know he's excited, or at least he said he's excited. I know I'm excited. I'm fairly certain all of you are excited. That is 8 p.m. this Wednesday, November 2nd, 8 p.m. Eastern, this Wednesday, November 2nd. We will have the Patriot Commander right here on this broadcast, and I get to interview him and ask him some questions that I've been dying to ask him. So ever since he has been on the show, I've attempted to try. We'll see you guys on Wednesday for that epic broadcast. And enjoy the rest of your weekend. Enjoy Halloween. Be safe out there. And we'll see you on Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Good night, everybody.